I'm John Gross. In 1969, I was drafted into the Army and I was sent to the Panama Canal Zone. My job, I was a TV sportscaster and a rock and roll disc jockey. I was really lucky. A couple weeks ago, I was reading a newspaper and there was an article by Jody Peters. It was outstanding. It was about a local man who was in the Navy. His name is John Lund, and he's our guest today. Thank you for your service, John.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
When did you serve and where did you serve?
I served from 1967 to 1971 in the United States Navy aboard an aircraft carrier, USS Hancock, as a machinist mate in the engine room.
Now, you had a brother that really helped you out when you were a youngster. You looked up to him in the first place.
Yes. My brother Olaf, he was 9 years older than myself, and mentored me as a young boy. He was operating farm machinery, and he would take me along. I would ride between his legs to drive the tractor, and I have many experiences of doing that. Along with my dad and my uncle, I thrived in that environment.
And you learned and you grew, and did you want to go into the service?
Yes, Olaf, again, my oldest brother, Olaf, he was a machinist mate in the Navy, had enlisted, and I kind of wanted to follow his footsteps and join the Navy out of high school and become a machinist mate. And that I did.
Where did you grow up? What high school did you go to?
Well, I was born in Montevideo, Minnesota, and lived there until the end of my fifth grade. My dad was a conductor on railroad and got a day job, more or less, in Farmington, Minnesota, as a conductor on the branch line. So he was home every night, which was great for a family. And so from 6th grade through 11th grade, I grew up in Farmington, Minnesota, which is really the years that I have fond memories of. And my dad broke his back in the railroad and was retired.
How did he break his back?
It was during a winter ice storm in February, and he was pulling a switch and he slipped to switch a train, and he broke his back. And he had surgery at the Mayo Clinic. They fused 3 vertebrae, but he could no longer work on the railroad. So my mom and dad, they purchased a resort in Lake City, Minnesota. And my senior year, I attended Lincoln High School in Lake City, Minnesota.
And it sounds like you had a pretty good time in Lake City. It seems like you met a girl there.
I did. Lake City, Minnesota, as I mentioned in my book, I wrote a book about my Navy experience, and as I mentioned in my book, 67 to 71, 66 and 67 were excellent. There were 2 excellent years for me, my high school year there in Lake City. I met Sandra a week into my high school year, and we started going together, and 50 years later, we had our anniversary. So
it sounds like you hit it off right away.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, it was, I was very fortunate.
Now, you had choices. One of the choices would be to go in the military. Why did you choose that to go in the Navy?
Well, again, during my senior year, really 11th grade, what you saw in the news, 3 channels, you had channel 4, 5, and 11, and what you saw in the news was the Vietnam War, nightly news. And those young boys graduating then, it was definitely on all of our minds. Really, no one really wanted to go over to Vietnam. That was because there was a struggle over there. There was a lot of people coming back severely wounded and coming back deceased. So my choices in my senior year were, enlist in the Navy, wait for the draft notice, and really that's your 2 choices. You could join the reserves. A lot of people did that. The National Guard back then, and a lot of people did that, and that was great. But I decided to go into the Navy again because I was still going to chase that dream of being a machinist mate like my brother.
So how old were you when you went into the service?
I was 18 years old. I was 18 years old when I went into the service, went to boot camp. I got out of boot camp, and Sandra and I, we got married then about 6 months later in February of '68. And by the time I was 19, I was married. I was a father, and I was already a war veteran. I had come back from full deployment over in Vietnam.
What was Vietnam like? Describe Vietnam.
Well,
How
Vietnam-
bad was it? What was it like?
Yeah, Vietnam, to a Navy veteran aboard an aircraft carrier was intense operation. When the ship was deployed to the war zone, it was deployed for 8 months. And during those 8 months, most of the time you were out in the war zone for 30 days. You'd pull back in for what they call R&R, rest and relaxation, for about 4 or 5 days into the Philippines or Japan. And then you back out again for another 30
Were you
days.
fired at?
No, the ship was not fired at.
Okay.
We had cover that was protecting us from our surface ships. The cruisers had surface air missiles on them, and we had 24 cover with aircraft in the sky. There was 3 ships on the line at all times, and those 3 ships you'd fly flight ops 12 hours a day. And when you weren't flying flight ops, you were taking on supplies, bombs, fuel, and food. So it was a 24-hour operation, and like I say, it was intense. I was a machinist mate in the engine room.
What does that mean?
A machinist mate in the engine room, you're responsible for operation of the main propulsion system. On an aircraft carrier, the USS Hancock, it was a World War II aircraft carrier. The engine room, there was no automation. It was all hand operation. You had 4 main engines, so with 4 screws, and the main engines were operated or propelled by 600-pound steam, 850-degree superheat, and that's what turned the turbines to turn the screws.
Here I was in the canal zone doing rock and roll radio. Here you were in the ocean. And how many hours a day did you work?
Typical day was 16 to 20 hours. It could be more. You'd stand 6 hours on, 6 hours off. Plus, during the day, that 6-hour off period, you had to turn to in the engine room or on a generator. When I say turn to work, you had repairs and maintenance to do to keep that engine room going.
How in the world do you do it?
Well,
How
and
do you
let me go a little bit further.
Keep your mind?
Yeah, let me go a little bit further. So, and then in between that, those watches that you stood, and those watches were in 120 to 140 degree heat. You were then also sent to commissary parties, working parties on the hangar deck, taking on food and ammo. So in between your watches, you had to help with bringing aboard food and ammo. So there are days there, I write in my letters to Sandra that, 24 hours, you didn't get any sleep. And the next 24 hours, you maybe only got 4 hours. And that was the life aboard an aircraft carrier as an enlisted person over in Vietnam. It was those 30 days in the war zone. Those were a tough 30 days. Now you pull in for 4 days for what they call R&R, and then back out for another 30. And during those 2 days, the 4 days that you pull in, 2 of those days you had duty. You couldn't leave the ship because someone had to be there to continue to man the ship. So
Well, all the things you've gone through, do you ever have flashbacks about?
no flashbacks about aboard the ship. Sandra saved all the letters that I had written her, and I wrote her pretty much every day when I could. And they were short letters because you're tired, so much going on. But 50 years later, I find these boxes of these letters, and I open them up, and it's my diary.
Oh,
And not only is it my diary, but it reopens the mental compartments that I closed on June 2nd, 1971, when I walked off the gangplank. And you walk off, you don't look back, and you just want to start your life with your family. And that's what I did. So when I opened up these letters and started to read them, you look at the date, March 22nd, 1968, and you read that letter, that information, that knowledge of that day all comes back to you. And that's how I was able to write my book.
touching and moving?
Very much so, especially the separation moments from Sandra. Absolutely. Again, we were deployed 8 months at a time. I had 3 deployments. I was married all 3 deployments. And so they were tough times. Of the 4 years I was in the Navy, 3 years, 8 months married to Sandra, I probably saw her a year and a half. The rest of the time I was on the ship. So there's a lot of definitely heartbreaking stories of being separated. You talk about Christmas, you talk about Thanksgiving, you're sitting there eating alone. Oh yeah, you got some sailors around you, but it's not like being at home.
This, to me, is a really big surprise. John wrote a book, and not only wrote a book, but it's close to 300 pages. I read it. It's outstanding. Congratulations on writing the book.
Well, thank you.
And how's it going?
The sales, they seem to, for a self-published book, sales seem to be good. For, about a month there, I was running on an average of number 5 on new releases for Vietnam on Amazon. So that was inspiring. And I've had a couple arts and crafts fairs that I've attended with the book, and sales have been good. And the response has been very, very good.
If somebody would have told you, as a senior in high school, you're going to write a book, what would you have told them?
That's an interesting thought. No, I was not a good student in high school when it comes to book studies, when it comes to English. And if it wouldn't have been for Sandra, I probably wouldn't have made it through English. My senior year, she was very good in school. She was an A student. She was going to go into journalism. She spent a half year in college before we got married. But as time progressed, things turned around for me. I continued to school myself when I got out of the Navy continuously. First I went to trade school for 4 years, night school as I worked, to school myself in my profession, and then I went to junior college to school myself further in areas that I needed improvement on. There was no two ways about it.
You picked out a keeper with your wife. Now, here's the question. How'd you write the book? What was the secret in you writing a 300-page book? What did you do when you wrote? Did you go into your bedroom and write it, or how'd you do it?
That's another good question. So I had a little office that I maintained at home, and I would go in, close the door, I'd turn on the music of the '60s, which I'm sure that you know a lot about, and that, along with the letters, I would pull out. And I would read, and the book is in chronological order. So as I read the letters, I would just write, and I wouldn't worry about whether or not it was, my spelling was perfectly or a sentence was structured right. I was just putting down my thoughts, and that worked well. And then after 11 revisions, by myself going through. I finally turned it over to a copy editor. I did have, before on my 11th revision, I had my sister, my younger sister, she was 4 years younger than myself, read it. She made it through college. She was a good student. And give me feedback, which was very helpful.
What are your take-home points from this book? What do you want people to remember about it? It's over 50 years ago that this happened.
Yes. That I was one of hundreds of thousands of veterans that could write a book with stories similar to mine. And and the hardships that went along with the Vietnam War and what the Vietnam War was about, the politics of it. So at 18 years old, you had the choice of enlisting or being drafted. So you were sucked up into this vortex of deceit to serve in a war that it really wasn't a declared war. It was a resolution by Congress signed by Johnson that gave him powers to combat North Vietnam and protect South Vietnam. And there's a lot there in regarding that subject also. But in the book, I roll in the politics of the 60s, the Vietnam War itself, how it was fought. That was another total disgrace, a disaster, as General H.R. McMaster's writes in his book, that the Vietnam War was the greatest American disaster of the 20th century. And research now shows that. And documents that have been released, declassified, show that. And that's why I wrote the book, and that's what I try to get across to the readers.
What's the response been?
Yeah, again, the response has been good. Those that stop by to talk, it's a positive response. So I'm very, very happy about that. Very fortunate. Yeah.
What is your goal with the book? Do you have a goal of how many copies you want to sell or anything like that, or you just want to put it out there and we'll see what happens?
Yeah, put it out there, and not even put it out there for the readers to have a better understanding of what naval life was like aboard a World War II aircraft carrier. And these World War II ships, these ships were ill prepared to go to war, at least to an extended war such as the Vietnam. I mean, it was a 10-year war. The ships were forced to leave harbor in disrepair, ill-prepared sailors, lacking of critical talent, knowing that they're going to be casualties. And those are the words from the captain of the ship 4 months into my first deployment that are written down, and I have the hard copy of. It was in a magazine that called the Hancock Signature, and he had an article in there from the bridge that talked about the ship not being ready to go. And that's why the title of my book, Danger, Toil, Affliction, Heartbreak, that is what describes what the captain was saying when that ship left port. It wasn't ready to leave. If you get a chance to read it, that's another good book about naval life.
It gets hot in Minnesota. I mean, during the summer, it's hot. What is hot in Vietnam?
Well, hot in Vietnam is tropical. The seawater injection temperature, 30 feet down, that we took in at the bottom of the ship for the condensers on the main engines, 88 degrees, 88 to 89 degrees. So the water was very warm. And I say that because, for that reason, the engine rooms were very warm. The engine rooms were 120 degrees at all times. Boiler rooms were 140. I would stand generator watch and number
Would
three.
you have to stand down where it's that hot?
Absolutely. For 6 full hours on a hot deck plate. Your feet would just cook. I would stand generator watch in number 3 and number 4 boiler room. And the generators providing electricity to the ship. You'd stand a 6-hour watch, watching your gauges, making sure that generator was operational, properly operating. For 6 hours, you'd stand there in that heat. Now, you'd stand underneath an air blower. They called it fresh air, but that was 90 plus degrees. You walk over to the air ejector that served as part of the equipment for the generator, 140 degrees on the thermostat. So it was hot. You'd stand and sweat. It was, and that's what you do for 30 days. 6 hours on, 6 hours off. Plus go up and offload bombs.
How do you get through that mind-wise? How do you set your mind to get through that?
Mine was what I had back home.
You would think about
That's all I can't go any further.
Okay.
I'll lose it.
Yeah. I don't want you to lose it. I want you to continue to talk.
That's what I had. But I'll have to say that a lot of sailors, they didn't have maybe the support structure. What they were looking forward to, honestly, was the next port stop, and that was to their relief. Bars, prostitutes, drugs, fights, and then pull back out for another 30 days. It was, and I think that's why a lot of the military came back from Vietnam with such distress, PTSD, hardships. I mean, you go in as an 18-year-old coming out of a small town, Lake City, Minnesota, with a Christian background, morals, and all of a sudden you're thrown into this pit of ill repute, and you had to swim your way through to make sure that you weren't sucked up in it. Mm-hmm. You weren't sucked up into that snake hole. So that in another area was, because you had a lot of peer pressure. Those that had already been over, you had a lot of peer pressure to join them and join in on the fun, what they considered fun. So that was difficult also. I was very fortunate. I was taken under a wing by a third-class machinist mate, Dave, and he was a straight shooter. Never drank, never smoked, never got in trouble. Didn't go out on his wife, yeah. And I was able to. He mentored me for 6 months as far as in the engine room knowledge. He was very knowledgeable. He stood assistant top watch in the engine room, and he got me. He made sure that I stayed on the right path. And like I say, I had a structure back home, and he knew that. We were good friends. Our wives got together. And with that, I as a machinist mate from E2, I grew to an E5 to where I was actually then standing top watch in the engine room. I was in full control of the engine room during a war. No one else down there had a higher authority than I did. And I take that was a huge responsibility to manage that engine room with 9 other sailors that were under me.
I was E5.
Yeah,
in
E5,
the Army.
yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I was a sportscaster, so it was totally different than...
yes, but a service, when you serve, you're serving the country. There's many different ways that you serve the country, so,
Do you keep in contact with anybody that you were in the service with?
There's one individual. Well, I've been in contact with a couple, but there's one individual that will trade Christmas cards. But besides that, no.
I'll tell you that the thing that touched me more than anything in the interview is the letters that you wrote. And you wrote them when you were, and then you found them not that long ago, right?
Yes, yep. And it's really about 3 years ago now. I found them and I started going through them. That's correct, yeah. Yep.
I love your heart. I love what you've done. I mean, this is really amazing to me, what you made out of a bad situation. You can turn a bad situation into an okay situation if you have faith and if you believe in yourself and your family, and here's the upbringing in Minnesota.
That's a real good point. And because of it, what good came out of it is that the Navy provided me a profession when I got out of the Navy to be able to get a good job. I got a job as a plant engineer, and then worked my way up to worked my way up to a director of facilities, managing over 2 million square feet of property. So they gave me a start.
Are you a better person because you were in the Navy?
I would say so. I would say so. I mean, it's a life lesson. You learn what not to do, where not to go, and absolutely.
I love this quote. Coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous. I don't think it was a coincidence you had a brother named Olaf. It seemed like he was your director. He was the one that said, go this way.
9 years older, he was absolutely my mentor, and provided me a lot of direction. Even after I got out of the service, I went into the same trade he was in. Started out operating boilers, plant management, and then worked my way up. Absolutely.
In the Army for 2 years, I have pleasant thoughts. Boy, I cannot absolutely imagine what went on in your life, and you can read about it in his book. What's the name of the book, and how can people get it?
The name of the book is Vietnam, 1967 to 1971, and it can be purchased on Amazon, Kindle, Barnes & Noble.
Doing any speeches?
I have no speeches programmed right now.
Would you like to give speeches?
Sure. I would be open to speaking. I taught heating, ventilating, and air conditioning for 5 years. So I am comfortable in front of people. I was a director of facilities management for Minnesota Life. So sure.
And you're retired now?
I'm retired. Been retired for 15 years.
Happy?
Very happy. Very fortunate.
Still married?
Yeah, absolutely. 50 years.
You've touched my heart and soul. I mean, you have gone through so much that people wouldn't go through, and you pulled through it. And you really did a good job. I'm proud of you and proud to know you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the time to interview me and give me a chance to tell my story.
You got to get his book. It is really good. What's the name of it, and where can people get it?
Again, the name Vietnam, 1967 to 1971. You can purchase it on Amazon, Kindle, or Barnes & Noble.
How do you sum up your service? If you had to sum it up in a sentence or a paragraph, how would you sum up the service that you were in?
Keeping it simple, it was a tough 4 years. It was a tough 4 years. I thought I would never get out of the service for several reasons. It just, every day you had a calendar and you'd strike off that day. Every day. I have a belt buckle that I have notches that I put in the belt buckle for every year, just waiting for that 4 years to end, when I could walk off the gangplank, which I did on June 2nd, 1971. Sandra standing on the pier at a phone booth that I directed her to stand next to with Heidi, our little one, who was 3 years old at the time.
How many children do you have?
I have 3 children.
And 9 grandchildren?
9 grandchildren.
Okay. John Lund, I'm proud to know you. I'm so happy that you did the interview. Good luck, and please keep in touch.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. I'm John Gross.